Unsurpassed selection and our low price guarantee. There's no place like the Show Place.
The first case of HIV/AIDS was identified 25 years ago. Since then, 25 million people have died. 5,000 people die daily. The fight against this disease still hasn't produced a cure. But every day, each and every person who joins the fight brings us that much closer to winning it. So why should I care? Because I do. Join the fight.
H1N1 swine flu infection. For intervention, I bring prevention. Dr. Clark, here I come to make your head numb. Health hot, lesson one to stop the bedlam. If you think you infected, seek attention. If you haven't, stay at home so you don't spread none. Use tissues when you sneeze, cause you can spread some. Cause coughed up germs is where it spreads from. I'm recommending washing hands for protection, front and back real thorough while you count 20 seconds. Hand sanitizer, I advise you get it. Why? It makes germs die when you rub and let it dry. Don't touch your eyes, your mouth, your nose, your face. That's how you get infected, so you better play it safe. Long-term outcome, we'll see the end come. Never sick again from the H1N1.
Hi, I'm Dr. John Clark. Before I wrote my lyrics, I went to flu.gov and got some great information. Log on to flu.gov and together we can stop the H1N1.
Welcome back to Sports Night. Always happy when we get Ken Coleman to join us here in the studio, and his series that we really enjoy called Life is Sport. I always turn it around and say sports is life, and he said, well, actually, sports is not life.
That's right. Yeah, it's a little bit of a play on words there, that life is not all about sports, but that life itself, we've all heard this phrase, is a contact sport. And we're really trying to talk with these A-listers and get from them great life lessons regardless of the X's and O's.
And you talked to John Pelphrey, the head coach at Arkansas. Interesting story with him, huh?
Yeah, you know, when we pick these interviews, you know, these A-listers, we pick them because they are successful and there's something we can learn. But the reason I was fascinated by John is he comes from a very small town in Kentucky, Paintsville, Kentucky, and even though he was Mr. Kentucky, he was doubted, and he really is an overachiever in every sense of the word.
You're going to enjoy this. Let's take a look at it now. Life is Sport with Ken Coleman.
Before you achieved the status as Mr. Basketball in Kentucky, you had some doubters. How did you respond to that personally?
I think a lot of times when we're going through this in life, it's very easy to feel sorry for yourself and say, why is it happening to me? This is what I always wanted to do. This is not the way it's supposed to go. I'm supposed to be doing this or that. And that's kind of what we all do with life, whether it's losing a loved one or losing a job or not getting the promotion that we want, those types of things. It's the same thing with a basketball team, with a career. Winning Mr. Basketball certainly put me in a situation where it kind of put a little bit of political heat on the school to maybe offer me a scholarship. But you know, I was the 7th man signed in a 7-man recruiting class. It wasn't a real popular decision that I made to go there. My redshirt freshman year, we were unbelievable. We were number 1 in the country for like 10 straight weeks, and then probation scandal did hit, and everybody left. And being a part of the only losing team in the history of the school, that wasn't cool. That wasn't what we were wanted to be remembered as. The guys were there when Kentucky wasn't so good, and you know, even up to our last game that we played, people always really doubted what we could or could not do, and in that last game, we weren't supposed to be able to compete with Duke. And it was such a back and forth affair for 45 minutes. It seems like whoever had the ball last was going to win because people were making such unbelievable plays. It was very devastating, and it was one of the hardest things I ever had to go through. And you know, it's interesting. You look at my career; it started out with a dream come true after a very, very difficult recruitment, and then all of a sudden things get sideways. We get it going back in the right direction. But I think that's life. It's always, you're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or you're getting ready to head into one. It's never a bed of roses. Everybody's always hoping for tomorrow, hoping if I can just get this one thing done, well, there's always going to be something you got to deal with. And I think, especially in a leadership position, you got to get comfortable with that. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned from my playing career to even being a head coach is it's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be smooth sailing. But even in those moments, we can still be successful.
You mentioned the feeling of devastation from that game in 1992, the Elite Eight game, last-second shot by Leitner. And I want to have you share a little bit more about devastation because your career didn't stop, life didn't stop, and while at the time had to be one of the most heartbreaking things you'd experienced, a bunch of young men in their 20s, yet you came out of that, and I'm sure it was a defining moment. Share how you and some of the members of that team didn't let that defeat define them, but it actually sharpened you and made you who you are today.
You know, I don't think it happened at that moment. I think it took years past that. And, you know, for an athlete, whenever something ends abruptly like that, your career's over, you don't ever play again, it's hard. And it was completely devastating because we didn't think about losing. Losing wasn't an option for us because we'd had to serve 2 years of probation. We had stuff taken away from us. We were putting all our eggs in one basket. And no matter what obstacles in front of us, we were going to find a way to overcome it. And Coach had us believing that. We understood they had Hurley, Leitner, and Grant Hill, and Cherokee Parks, and all these guys on that team. But we were going to somehow, some way, we were going to find a way to overcome that. And when it didn't happen for us, it was completely devastating. It was hard. It was difficult. I can remember as an assistant coach going to the Final Four and eventually the national championship game at Florida, and my son, he was 3 years old at the time. It was in 2000 we went, and he had a chance to go to practice. We had a practice in front of everybody in Indianapolis, and he got a chance to go on the floor. There's a picture of me and him. I'm lifting him up so he can shoot a basketball. And then I remember seeing that picture the next day in the paper. I'm thinking to myself, you know, he doesn't care. He doesn't care that we didn't go to the Final Four. He doesn't care who made or missed that shot that ended my career. And I realized that, you know, my life wouldn't necessarily have been better had the basket gone in. And that's the whole thing as an athlete. You know, if we could just win this game. If we can just win this game. And it took that long for me to figure out that, you know, my life is a little bit bigger than just winning that basketball game, because I look in his eyes and I'm his dad, and all he cares about is having me lift him up so he can shoot a basketball in front of 20,000 people. And but that was 4, 5, 6 years later.
Ken Coleman with John Pelphrey. And Ken, John's faced adversity over there coaching at Arkansas too. He's had to suspend players. He had player he couldn't get signed, various kinds of problems over there. So I guess he took these lessons with him to Arkansas to cope with that situation.
Yeah, no question. I mean, he took over for Stan Heath, and that program was really in tatters when he took it over. So he did tell me privately, I think we're a couple years away from really reestablishing ourselves as an SEC power.
Well, you know, Ken, we talk about overcoming adversity on the court. You talked to him briefly about overcoming the adversity off of the court. He lost his infant son, but he never gave up. In fact, started a foundation called Pel's Pals, and it's a way to remember his infant son.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his life, you know, it's a series of people doubting him. We mentioned in the piece that he was the 7th last man in his recruiting class at Kentucky, but he finally got the scholarship. Eddie Sutton, scandal breaks, everything kind of falls apart. But with his personal life, a few years ago, they lost an infant son right before birth. And coming out of that, they just felt like, you know, when you lose a child, that's the most devastating thing that can happen to you. And he said, we wanted to do something to help families who go through that type of thing, or with neonatal resources, and that's what Pel's Pals does. It really helps with counseling and the money and resources for the neonatal care for families that are struggling with that.
All right, Ken Coleman, you're going to be back soon, I hope, with another?
Hope so, yes, very soon.
All right, talk to the, as you call them, the A-listers and people who have overcome and succeeded and have to do it every day when they get back up again. Ken Coleman, Life is Sport. We'll be back in just a moment with a young man who has some high ambitions. I'm talking about Jeff Owen, the DT from Georgia, who's hoping to make it in the NFL. Stay with us.
Will he add his name to the list of terrorizing and talented D linemen to come out of Athens? We'll